This episode deals with the issue of suicide, and as such, it might be triggering or upsetting. If you or someone you know needs support, there are people who are trained to listen and to offer the support that you may need. We've included some support links in the notes for this episode. Welcome to the Breach Show, featuring sharp analysis on politics and social movements in Canada. I'm your host, Desmond Cole. For nearly a year, the federal government has been quiet about a scathing United Nations report on Canada's treatment of disabled people. The UN criticized Canada's expansion of medical assistance in dying, or MAID, as well as the inadequate financial supports for disabled people that make life so unlivable. What does Prime Minister Carney's austerity agenda mean for disabled folks in this country? Joining me to discuss that today is Megan Linton, a PhD candidate at Carleton University's Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and the creator and host of Invisible Institutions, a documentary podcast exploring the past and present of institutions for people labeled with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Canada. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And just before we get started, a reminder to our audiences to like and subscribe if you want more bold journalism for transformation. Megan, I want to start with the topic of medical assistance in dying, or MAID. It's been a legal practice in Canada for nearly a decade now, and it began as a practice of assisted death for people whose deaths were deemed to be reasonably foreseeable due to grievous and immediate medical conditions. So this is referred to as Track 1. But in 2021, the practice was expanded to include anyone suffering from a grievous and an irredeemable condition whose death was not reasonably foreseeable, as long as they were experiencing what the law calls substantial suffering. This is referred to as Track 2. So in 2024 alone, about 16,500 people chose to end their lives through MAID. And Megan, I want to ask you, how do you feel that this practice has changed the way we view life and death in this country?
I think that medical assistance in dying has radically transformed every way in which we view disability and chronic illness, along with pain and suffering of any form. And what I mean by that is that it's not just all disabled people who are already disabled who are impacted, but also all of those people who might become disabled through various possibilities, like a workplace accident, like getting really sick from COVID-19 and never fully recovering. And so I think once MAID has been planted as the response to disability, as the response to the challenges that are super real, it is incredibly difficult for me as a wheelchair user to leave my house this winter. That is very real. That is a legitimate piece. And the ways in which our society has now been structured to alleviate those struggles is really devastating, because we're increasingly telling people that the easiest option is assisted suicide, as opposed to all of the different ways that so many disabled communities and non-disabled communities have been living through illness, disease, pain, suffering, accidents for so many centuries. And so this, I think, is particularly concerning because we're in this time where 10 years ago, when MAID was introduced, we were at a very different place in the political economy of health that we are post the COVID-19 pandemic, and the continued neoliberalization of all of our state services. And so now we're in a place of very real suffering that is often manufactured, made worse, or refused to be alleviated by state services. And then there's MAID, which it's there. There's articles from doctors, from public health, on how to support people in accessing MAID. And it's really difficult to find how to support yourself to survive in so many different ways. But there are ways, but they require a lot more support and a lot more effort than just a quick Google search. And all of these lobbying organizations have all of these documents ready for you if you choose to die by assisted suicide.
Well, you've described this as a limiting of imagination, and I wonder if you can expand on that, what you mean that this condition, this state that we're in, is limiting our imagination when we think about disability and the lives that people can live.
Yeah, I was going through some of the coroner's investigations that the province of Ontario's Office of the Chief Coroner did following the 2024 made counts. And I think it like really devastated me because you can see yourself, and everyone, disabled and non disabled, can see themselves in these stories where they say, I became disabled, and then within the year, I died by suicide because I was causing caregiver burden on my partner. How devastating is that? That we think that our lives, that disabled lives, that the lives of people who are sick, who have terminal illnesses, are burdens, as opposed to these incredibly real gifts that offer so much. And I think like that is the thing about disability, is that it offers you a million, a billion possible ways of living, of surviving, of caring for each other, of teaching your neighbor how important it is that they are able to shovel their driveway quickly so you can leave the house. And all of those things are actually very tangible pieces of how our society thrives. And if instead our society is limited to the fact that if someone is so sick, then they should die by suicide, then that is so grievous to all of these ways of life that give us so much. I think about my uncle, who's my favorite person in the world. He was given a terminal diagnosis at 16 and he's still alive. He's really struggled in his life because of the ways in which we construct illness. But he brought me so much joy, and as a person becoming disabled, I always think of him as a point of strength, as a point of dignity, as a point of perseverance, and those are pieces that help me survive. They help my friends who are non-disabled and just, like, trying to survive in this really broken world, and so I think disability offers us all of these amazing possibilities of life. I grieve for the community and for all the people, disabled and non-disabled and families and kin who have suffered as a result of this, whether it's upon a diagnosis and feeling like this is the best option and I am a burden, or upon years of suffering and struggling to know that there's other possibilities for care. Like I the amount of work I do to just show people the possibilities of care that are out there that are funded, but just are privatized into all of these different little sectors that it's so hard to find. This limitation of our imagination is coming at a time, there's like all of these ways that we're limiting our imagination, whether it's like AI, whether it's made all of these pieces, and they fit together because it's teaching us that what we think, what we say, what we do, our inherent worth as humans is not good enough. We actually should just be machines, and then maybe we'd be able to function a little better, um, not be a burden. We are watching a fundamental degradation of our imaginations, and disability is a really amazing fundamental piece to this. And the fact that MAID is happening at this time is a part of this loss of um, belief in each other, this loss of community capacity to dream and build, and this capacity for each other to show up and be real and be there and know how to show up when people are sick, when people are hurting, when people are injured, which is a really important skill.
You mentioned that your uncle was given a terminal diagnosis at 16. Do you mind me asking me how old he is today?
He is 64, maybe 66. It was his birthday recently, but I'll give him 66, 64.
Now, the vast majority of MAID provisions in Canada fall under track one, and that is deaths deemed to be reasonably foreseeable by a healthcare expert, as opposed to a minority of provisions that fall under track two. people who accessed MAID even though doctors and specialists didn't see their conditions as terminal. So, what should we make of these two different categories of MAID and how they're being used?
Yeah, I think that we often deem one of them as like good and worthy of our efforts, and one of them as a step too far and the government like intervening in people's lives a bit too much. And so I think the differences in track one and track two, I am concerned about them. 50% of people who received MAID in the track one category had pain that wasn't managed. Like, that is horrifying. Someone's at the end of their life and you're not giving them opioids because you're scared that they're gonna be addicted to them. Like, I can't say for certain that that's the path, but based on the stories of disabled people I know, when they are even when they have terminal diagnosis, the, like, prescription of opioids, if they're in a certain class of people, is not possible. And so, like, 50% of people dying by MAID do not have their pain managed under track one. Like, that's absurd to me. I'm a death doula. I, like, do a lot of death care. I find it difficult to find words once again, but I think it's a level of cruelty that the medical system is enacting every day, and if you're not someone who's engaging every day in the medical system, you might not necessarily see it or feel the ways in which it grinds you down. But the medical system right now is not functioning to care for people. It is functioning at its least possible capacity, like, it is completely overrun. There is so many, um everything possible is terrible within the healthcare system, and we have so many doctors who are giving whose, like, sole procedures are killing people when there's people who need life-saving surgeries, and so when there's people who might not wanna die if their pain was managed, and it's possible. Pain management is so possible, and we have so many concerns about how pain management works such that we make it very difficult for it to happen. I'm going to quickly go into the fact that doctors are prescribing medical assistance in dying when people have, psychiatric labels. That is supposed to be not legalized. And yet, reviewing multiple different coroner's reports from different provinces shows that doctors are ending people's lives in or like are following psychiatric admissions, with the majority of diagnoses being psychiatric. And so the
And I'm
ways
sorry
in
to interrupt you, but this is
no, no,
despite the fact that the federal government says right now it is only considering expanding MAID to include these kinds of mental illness as the only underlying condition. And it's not supposed to be legal to do that at this point, correct?
no, no, it is not supposed to be legal to assist someone in their suicide if their sole underlying condition is mental illness. And there are many conditions that we would never assume are like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome.
Hmm.
I feel like there's so many memes on the internet. Hot girls have IBS. All of these things. You know, we talk about IBS very colloquially, but I think like why I brought this up is that the way in which medical practitioners engage in lots of different forms of bureaucracy within this process is messy and is not smooth. It is a lot more chaotic than it appears. And I think we see this when they say there's no system to determine no, like, shared system to determine if someone is suicidal at the time of their MAID intake. As I said at the beginning, we're in a moment where the political economy of health has fundamentally been broken and reshaped by the COVID-19 pandemic and the absolute decimation of services that happened in that time. And as a result of the cuts that happened and continue to happen, of the millions and billions that aren't invested in the services that are out there, like the healthcare services, is that people are getting sicker and people are having to wait longer to get terminal diagnoses, to get diagnoses. All of this system of bureaucratization of death and of the determination of life and what is within the categories of a life that is not terminal is that we can't say for sure because all of our systems have been gutted so drastically that we are putting people in a position where they have terminal diagnoses at a much higher rate. If you look at all of the different stats on cancer surgeries, on all of the different forms of care that help people remain having a good quality of life, I think that that is a very important piece of the story. I think another really important piece of the story is that doctors really feel confident in their decisions and they don't know the story. Like, they cannot see the future. They could not see what would happen with my uncle. I'm very lucky to be a person who knows so many people who've lived 10, 15 years with terminal diagnoses. The piece that I guess I want to make is that your life doesn't have to be terrible, even if you're given a terminal diagnosis. And your life does not need to be painful. Your life does not need to consist of suffering. You do not need to consider yourself a burden. That is not how we should be able to exist. We should be able to exist such that palliative is like a system where people are able to access it to live good lives, where they have access to the care and treatment that they need, where they are able to manage their pain, where they are able to see the ducks that they love do a final migration. Like, all of these things are possible. And we prevent them from being possible by continuing to defund our entire healthcare system and continuing to rely on medical assistance in dying to alleviate the suffering that we have intentionally created. By we, I mean, like, the cruel state system.
Well, speaking of the state and its system, um, Prime Minister Mark Carney has been very clear that austerity measures in this time are necessary for Canada's economic survival. How would you say that Mark Carney's approach is influencing the fight for disability justice in Canada, more broadly than medical assistance in dying, but just his general thrust of austerity?
Mark Carney is decimating every single piece of state services that work to keep people alive. It's just like speed run of EV mandates, the elimination of public transit things, everything which will accelerate the climate crisis, all of which we know accelerates people's lack of access to health and survival, and also will be killing people faster. Like, he's like eliminating climate dashboards, and all of these things help keep people alive. The Inuit First Child benefit, which are helping people get the food that they need, or all of the different cuts that are coming down through Correctional Services Canada, where they are, and this continuing to expand assisted living beds. And, like, if we wanna talk about disgusting, like, people are dying through medical assistance and dying in prisons. Now we're creating assisted living beds. So what? So they can access MAID easier through an assisted living a carceral living facility? Like, the way that he is doing everything is seeking to make life worse for all of us, except for the, like, elite class and except for all of the corporations that, um, he has invested in all these years. And so I think particularly when we look at even, like, the absolute decimation of the public services, like, all of those pieces are going to lead to increased use of AI within the federal sector to determine things like how to make decisions about disability benefits, about seniors benefits, about um, where people are getting access to the supports that they need. When we look at, like, all of the new Accessible Canada Act, all of those things are going to be in vain if the way that the public service is like completely hollowed out. Like many of the calls within the Accessible Canada Act, including like a certain percentage of the public service was supposed to be disabled, and they never got there. And now the public service, they're going to be eliminating largely disabled workers, many of whom have had, you know, virtual opportunities which are now being reduced. And so every single day that a cut is carried out through the system, whether in prisons or on the roads in our public transit system, or in access to summer jobs programs, like all of these things that we don't even realize are fundamental to our lives. But what is very crystal clear is that people's lives are getting worse. Food is getting more expensive. Things are getting more expensive. And the decision is only to slash more jobs. The decision is only to make things more difficult, to make the climate continue to get hotter, to invest in pipelines, to do all of the things that are killing us, that are making us sicker, while doing nothing. When the Canadian disability benefit came down in, I guess it was real last year, 2025, the Canadian disability benefit didn't do anything. It failed in that it was so little money that it is doing all of the that it is failing to do what it is supposed to do, which is like bring people out of poverty as a result of the $200 they get a month. All of these pieces, and I think especially the hollowing out of the public service and the replacement with many of these key services with AI, are all pieces that, as disabled people who rely on the state to make determinations about things like the disability tax credit, which determines the Canadian disability benefit, like these are all at risk and are all in jeopardy. I do want to also mention the cutting of refugee healthcare, and forcing refugees to pay for healthcare. Like, how is that going to improve the economic certainty of our country? Like, it is not. And so what we need to do right now is we need to start and continue to mobilize together and bring these ideas together and bring them into conversation with each other. I don't think it does us any good to ever just isolate MAID into a separate conversation, because all like critical to what it is about the elimination of our imagination of what is possible. And so we need to continue imagining together how we're going to counter this, how we're going to build worlds where people desire life, where we all want to show up for one another, be there when people are in pain, learn how to cook food that people like, learn how to give, like to insert feeding tubes and change oxygen tanks. These are all critical skills that will help us survive whatever is next, whatever is to come. And removing that is only de-skilling each and every one of us and removing these really important skills of imagination, of dreaming, and of life. I don't think our imagination has been killed. And I think like as the population has really woken up to like the violence and the risk of AI. And so I think as like I bring them together because it's an issue of imagination. And I think that we can dream worlds where people's needs are met, where they're cared for, where they are, where we are all like, I can say that because I live a life where, frankly, most of the time I can get the things that I need because my community has dreamed up those things around me. And I could never have imagined that all of these, like all of the possibilities of my life 5 years ago when I got a new diagnosis. But they're all possible. And like life is possible. And toppling empire is possible. It is all able to be dreamed up, but we can't lose that skill, that muscle, that energy.
Mm. You have also made an interesting connection between Mark Carney's major plans to invest in the Canadian military and disability. Could you talk a little bit about that?
The one thing that he has invested in and will continue to invest in is our military and our military service. I think the most striking example of the overstepping of MAID was when a veteran was told they should access MAID following workplace injuries.
A retired corporal who is paraplegic shocked MPs in Ottawa yesterday when she told them an employee of Veterans Affairs Canada offered her help with arranging a medically assisted death.
So a few years back, it came to light that there was a woman who had contacted VA about getting a stair lift put into her house. And Veterans Affairs said that, no, that's too hard. You should die. Like if your life is so difficult, die by maid. And this is, I think, represents a very fundamental piece of the ways in which the military functions, where it, like engages in debilitation, physical and mental and emotional, of its members. B, it creates this way of understanding life where if you can't do the thing you were supposed to do, if you can't murder another person, then it's just easier if you die by maid, so we don't have to think about it. And so I think this example is helpful because it shows the mindset of our state military system, which is like a very violent entity. It debilitates all of the members. Like if we look at the rate and the increase, like height of PTSD within the Canadian military, if we look at traumatic brain injuries, physical injuries, all of these different pieces, and that's only in the country that we're in. And so when we look at it globally and then are in a time of climate collapse, we are just expanding the debilitation of so many people. And so the military really is part and parcel to this like broader shift to mass debilitation and or this acceleration of mass debilitation because we've always been a country that is like the founding of Canada was fundamental upon the debilitation of so many different Indigenous communities and ways of life and ways of existing. And it has only continued and only continues to accelerate as the military continues to take up more and more of our resources, eat away at more and more of our economy, and also like capture so much of what the population en masse thinks is necessary. Like what he is doing is hollowing out all of the other services within the state and giving them to the military. Like, if you look at within the public service, people are just like, "Okay, well, the only job I can get is within the military," and then that's the culture that people are getting wrapped up in, and so there's, like I think we're watching this mass capture of people in terms of, like, getting brought into the military industrial complex in a really expansive way, and I'm, largely in the city of Ottawa, and so you see, like, the ways in which, like, people are shifted from, like, losing their jobs en masse, going into the D&D universe, and then immediately, experiencing violence, abuse, uh, and then passing it on. The Department of National Defense, the armed forces are incredibly violent places to work, to exist amongst, and they both accelerate the debilitation of their members and of other people within the wider globe and world. And their own families also, like, I think there's lots of stats on the rates of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence among military professionals. So we
Definitely.
know we can see within the membership, we see that there's a problem of debilitation. We take a step back. We know that the Canadian military and its many different capacities is involved in global debilitation, whether it's through UN peacekeeping missions where they are bringing sexually transmitted infections to populations and engaging in like horrific acts that debilitate populations, or they are engaging in warfare, which is like debilitating and killing people, or within our own country, the ways in which the military functions is both a way to out all of our services and instead beef up the military industrial complex and bring people in there. and fundamentally reshape the way that we live, because that's always what the Canadian military has done. These like massive investments in the Canadian military do reshape our world because they're absolutely hollowing out all of these other things, resources, which are critical to our survival.
Mm.
Obviously, we don't need the military, and we are so dead set on it being the only possibility to maintain this violent state entity that exists as the country of Canada. And so we got to keep up. And so I think it's a really violent circuit of debilitation and then creating a new structure to like fix this, to make it go away.
You mentioned the Canada Disability Benefit and the very meager $200 a month maximum that is provided there. I know you've devoted a lot of time to understanding how benefits like this one work. So for people who don't understand how you qualify even to get this $200, can you give an idea of how much work it takes to receive this benefit?
Absolutely. So in order to access the Canadian Disability Benefit, you must first qualify for the disability tax credit. The disability tax credit is a much hated state benefit, which many disabled people don't access because if you don't work, you are not forced to pay your taxes. And so because you don't have taxes to pay. And the government won't come find you to tell you that you have benefits. And so you are forced to like go to a consultant, maybe pay $500 an hour to get them to give you this form, fill out this form. Then you have to go to your doctor if you have a family doctor, because a walk-in specialist probably won't fill out the disability tax credit form for you. Some of them might, but it is a lengthy form and it is very difficult to access. It is particularly difficult to access for people with psychiatric disabilities. It's also a difficult process for people who might not fully understand all of the different forms and hoops that they have to jump through to be able to get the benefit in the first place.
Right.
But then we're not even there yet, Desmond. So maybe you get the tax credit. Probably you won't get it. So you got to redo it. And then go back to your doctor, pay another $110 for the form to be filled out, return, and then you might get the tax credit. And then if you get the tax credit, you might automatically get the Canadian Disability Benefit unless you live in Alberta. And so I think the ways in which the Canadian
Sorry, that's
Disability...
because Alberta has a clawback of the disability benefit?
That's right. And so there's lots of different ways that provinces have responded to the disability benefit. And Alberta was the most brutal in cutting the benefit and clawing it back for people who get services under their Alberta income for the severely handicapped. And so it is a lot of hoops, and it is not always possible. And it is like $200 a month versus $200 for just just to get the forms in. And that's really, really, I think it's an illustration of the ways in which the bureaucracy can make things really difficult. But then when we look at MAID, they have expedited processes. Some people can get a MAID assessment within the following day. And so I think it's important to contrast those two pieces because it took years. Like, Desmond, the number of archival documents I have dug through to see how much work was put into creating the Canadian Disability Benefit, like decades. And then MAID was rushed through within months following so much consultation that showed that it was going to be dangerous. It was going to be risky. And it was.
I'm grateful for you providing this contrast. Finally, I want to talk about a word that's become more and more a part of our political conversations in this country and in North America, and that word is fascism. The fear that our governments are increasingly authoritarian and increasingly ultra-nationalist. You have said that disability is often missing from these broader political conversations about fascism, and I wonder if you can explain for us why it is important that disability be centered in these conversations?
If we look at things like the Third Reich in Nazi Germany, we can understand very clearly the ways in which disability serves as a way in which marginalized populations, like a very early target for fascist governments. And so the ways in which disability are particularly made more marginal are often kind of discrete. But during COVID, it really came to light how clear the idea and the belief of disabled people as burdens was within the state dynamics. And that specific underlying belief and its acceleration, because disabled communities were targeted for the far right by the far right for our work trying to keep people safe from diseases. By being anti-disease, it was like a very early target for fascist states, for fascist governments. We see this with like the ways in which mask mandates are being crawled back, but also like within Canada, it's not surprising that Danielle Smith has made it so that it's so difficult for people to access many different vaccinations that keep them, that prevent them from getting sicker. And so disabled communities are amongst the communities alongside many of the existing communities that have always been targeted for elimination. And so I think the ways in which we need to show up for one another right now are what is going to keep people alive, because we do know that this is killing people and this is killing our friends and neighbors. And these are people who are going to be critical in this very long fight against fascist state governments that will continue to press on our necks. But disabled people and the joy, the wonder, the grit, the like determination, those are very important skills and ways of existing that need to make it. We need to all make it through. And so, how do we show up for each other right now as the bureaucracy is being created such that anyone who's suffering can have their suffering alleviated with just the click of a button? I remember when MAID, the second round of MAID was passed, and I was doing a lot of direct peer support. And that peer support, I think it was never clearer to me that this is like the ways in which we create the conditions for people to die are being manufactured, are being um, accelerated, and the like things that kept me going were other disabled people, like because it, even when you're in the depths, even when you're in like the darkest place, like having someone with you or that you're able to be with who finds this deep joy in playing with tubes is really helps me survive. Like it totally helps me be a person, to know that there's joy that can be found even in the most horrific conditions, and it is possible. I really think that organizers need to show up for one another right now and show up for each other in like very meaningful ways, because we are each other's gift. There's so much joy and there's so much grief, and I think I encourage all of us to sit with both of those and find them.
Well, speaking of gifts, it's been our gift to have you come and join us and share your insights on this topic. Megan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.